The first time Caleb touched me, I honestly thought it was an accident. That's what I kept telling myself anyway, because there was no way the insanely attractive plumber standing in my kitchen had meant to let his hand slide across my waist like that. No way he meant to keep it there for that extra second. No way he looked at me afterward with that expression calm, unreadable but definitely aware. And yet, he never apologized. It all started because my apartment building was falling apart. The shower barely worked, the hallway lights flickered every night, and the kitchen sink had been leaking for weeks. I'd already complained 3 times, but my landlord ignored every message until water finally started pouring onto my floor one Tuesday morning. I was standing there in gray sweatpants and an old hoodie, trying to stop the leak with a towel, when somebody knocked on my door. Hard, impatient. I opened it half awake and immediately forgot how to speak. The guy standing there was tall, broad shoulders, tattooed forearms, dark hair tucked under a backwards cap. His work shirt stretched across his chest every time he moved, and he carried a heavy toolbox like it weighed nothing. "Maintenance," he said. "You Parker." His voice was low, rough around the edges. I blinked stupidly for a second before nodding. Yeah. "Caleb," he said, stepping inside. "Landlord sent me." I moved aside automatically while trying not to stare. Didn't work, because Caleb was unfairly hot. Not polished hot. Not influencer hot. He looked real. Slight stubble along his jaw, tired eyes, rough hands, faded tattoos disappearing beneath his sleeves. The kind of guy who looked better the longer you looked at him. And unfortunately for me, he noticed me looking. "You gonna show me the sink?" he asked with the smallest smirk. Heat rushed straight into my face. "Right? Yeah. Sorry." I led him into the kitchen while silently dying inside. Caleb crouched under the sink almost immediately, sleeves tightening around his arms as he reached for the pipes. I leaned against the counter pretending to check messages on my phone while sneaking glances every 5 seconds. The apartment was quiet except for metal clanking and Caleb muttering under his breath. "Whoever installed this did a terrible job," he said. "Sounds like this building." He laughed softly at that. God, even his laugh was attractive. A few minutes later, he held out his hand without looking at me. "Wrench." I grabbed one from the toolbox beside me and passed it over. Our fingers brushed. Tiny contact, still enough to send a stupid rush through my chest. Caleb glanced up briefly, and for a second, the air changed. It's hard to explain, but suddenly I became hyper-aware of everything. The size of the kitchen, the closeness between us, the fact that I was alone in my apartment with a man who looked like he belonged in every fantasy I'd ever tried to ignore. I cleared my throat awkwardly. "So, you do plumbing full-time? MHM. You always work apartment buildings?" "Mostly." He tightened something under the sink before adding, "Sometimes houses." His voice echoed slightly from beneath the counter. I shouldn't have kept staring, but I did. Then Caleb suddenly slid backward faster than expected. Straight into me. My breath caught as his body bumped against mine, and his hand landed firmly on my hip to steady himself. Warm. Strong. Way too natural. "Oh." I breathed before I could stop myself. Caleb froze. Not fully. Just enough. His hand stayed there. 1 second. 2. His eyes lifted slowly to mine, and I swear something passed between us right then. Something sharp and immediate that made my stomach twist. Because he knew exactly what that touch was doing to me. "Sorry," he said quietly. But he still didn't move his hand. I could barely think. "You're okay," I managed. His fingers flexed once against my hip before he finally let go. And somehow that felt worse. The kitchen suddenly felt too small. Too hot. Caleb sat back against the cabinet beneath the sink, looking up at me with an unreadable expression. I crossed my arms mostly so he wouldn't notice how shaky my hands suddenly felt. "You nervous around plumbers, Parker?" he asked. I laughed once. "Only the rude ones." That smirk appeared again. "Rude? You touched me and didn't apologize." Caleb stared at me for a second too long. Then his eyes dropped briefly to my waist where his hand had been. When he looked back up, his voice sounded lower somehow. "Maybe I wasn't sorry." My heart nearly stopped. For a second, neither of us moved. I just stood there staring at Caleb while his words replayed in my head. "Maybe I wasn't sorry." My pulse was so loud I could barely hear the dripping water from the sink anymore. He looked completely calm saying it too, which somehow made it worse. Like he hadn't just casually shattered every coherent thought in my brain. I forced out a nervous laugh. That's a crazy thing to say to someone you just met. Caleb held my gaze for another second before finally looking back down at the pipes. Maybe, but the smirk on his face told me he knew exactly what he was doing. I should have backed off then. Should have gone to another room and waited for him to finish like a normal person. Instead, I stayed leaning against the counter watching him work while tension slowly filled the entire apartment. You flirt with all your clients? I asked eventually. Caleb snorted softly. You flirt with all your plumbers? Heat rushed into my face immediately. I wasn't flirting. MHM. You're staring. I opened my mouth to argue and immediately realized he was right, which only made him grin wider. God, this is harassment, I muttered. Pretty sure you started it, Parker. I laughed despite myself, shaking my head while Caleb returned to working under the sink. But now every little thing felt different. Every glance, every accidental brush of his arm against my leg in the tiny kitchen, every pause that lingered just a little too long. Then Caleb suddenly cursed under his breath. What? Pipes tighter than I thought. He leaned farther underneath the sink cabinet. Need more room. I stepped aside quickly. Sorry. Nah, he said. Come here. I frowned slightly. Why? Need you to hold the flashlight. He handed me his phone with the flashlight on and guided my wrist toward the cabinet opening. His fingers wrapped around my hand briefly while positioning it. Again, completely unnecessary. Again, he didn't apologize. My breathing turned uneven almost immediately because now I was crouched beside him close enough to feel heat radiating from his body. You always this tense? Caleb asked quietly. I'm not tense. You sure? His arm brushed my thigh. Definitely on purpose this time. I swallowed hard. You're enjoying this way too much. A soft laugh left him. Maybe. I tried focusing on the flashlight while Caleb worked, but it was impossible. Especially when he smelled ridiculously good for somebody fixing pipes all day. Soap, laundry detergent, something warm underneath it. Then he shifted suddenly, and his shoulder pressed directly against my chest. I froze. Caleb glanced sideways at me without moving away. Neither of us said anything. The silence became unbearable. You do this a lot? I asked quietly. Do what? This. I gestured vaguely between us. The whole making people nervous thing. His eyes moved slowly over my face before settling on my mouth for a brief second. Only when they like it. My stomach flipped so hard it actually hurt. Before I could respond, Caleb reached past me for another tool and his hand slid across my waist again. Slow this time. Deliberate. I took a breath instantly. Caleb noticed. Of course he noticed. His expression darkened slightly, and suddenly the tiny kitchen didn't feel safe anymore. Not dangerous, exactly worse. Tempting. You keep reacting like that, he said softly, and I'm gonna start thinking you want me touching you. I stared at him. Then, against every smart decision my brain tried making, I said, maybe I do. The room went completely still. Caleb's eyes locked onto mine immediately, and for the first time since he walked into my apartment, he looked affected too. Caleb stared at me for what felt like forever. Maybe I do. The words hung between us, heavy and impossible to take back. I could actually hear my own heartbeat. For the first time since he walked into my apartment, Caleb looked caught off guard. Not by much, just enough for me to notice the slight shift in his expression. The way his jaw tightened for a second before he looked away. Then he exhaled slowly through his nose. Careful, Parker. His voice came out lower this time. That should have been my warning. Instead, I stepped even closer. Why? I asked quietly. Caleb stood up fully from beneath the sink, and the sudden height difference made my stomach twist again. Up close, he felt overwhelming. Broad shoulders, tired eyes, rough hands still holding the wrench loosely at his side. Because, he said slowly, you keep looking at me like that. Like what? Like you're trying to decide something. I swallowed hard. Maybe I was. The apartment had gone completely silent now except for the faint hum of traffic outside. Caleb leaned one hand against the counter beside me, trapping me in the small space without actually touching me. still close enough that I could feel the heat from his body. "You this bold with everyone?" he asked. "Only plumbers who touch me and act smug about it." That made him laugh quietly. Then his eyes dropped to my mouth again, and stayed there. My chest tightened instantly. "You got a boyfriend?" Caleb asked suddenly. The question caught me off guard. "No." He nodded once like he expected that answer. "You? Not anymore." Something about the way he said it made me curious, but before I could ask, Caleb reached past me to shut off the faucet completely. His arm brushed against my chest again, deliberately slow. I let out the smallest breath without meaning to. Caleb noticed immediately. Of course he did. "That sound gonna keep happening every time I touch you?" he asked softly. I laughed nervously, looking away. "You're impossible. And you're nervous. You keep saying that. Because you are." I hated how right he was. Caleb set the wrench down on the counter beside me, but instead of stepping away, he stayed exactly where he was. Close enough that one tiny movement would put us chest to chest. Neither of us moved. Then his fingers touched my waist again. Gentler this time, like he was testing something. My breath caught immediately. "Caleb." His thumb brushed lightly against the fabric of my hoodie. "You want me to stop?" he asked quietly. That should have been an easy question. It wasn't, because the truth was I hadn't stopped thinking about his hands since the moment he walked into my apartment. And judging by the way he was looking at me now, Caleb knew it. I shook my head once before I could lose my nerve. His expression changed instantly. Subtle, but real, like something inside him snapped tight. Then Caleb stepped closer until our bodies barely touched. "Jesus," he muttered softly, almost to himself. "You have no idea what you're doing to me." My stomach flipped violently. I looked up at him, heart pounding so hard it hurt. And then there was this moment. One awful, electric second where it felt obvious what was about to happen. The tension between us had been building since he opened my door. Now it finally felt unbearable. Caleb's hand slid from my waist slightly higher along my side, fingers pressing firmly through the thin fabric of my hoodie, while his eyes searched my face carefully, still giving me a chance to stop this. I didn't. Instead I whispered, "You still haven't apologized." That finally broke him. Caleb laughed once under his breath before leaning down closer, his forehead nearly touching mine. "No," he said quietly, "and I'm probably not going to." The air between us felt dangerously thin. Caleb was so close now that every breath I took brushed against him. His hand stayed firm against my side, fingers spread wide like he already knew exactly how to hold me. And I let him. That was the part making my head spin the most. I should have stepped back. Should have laughed this off and given him some excuse about needing to leave for work. Instead, I stayed frozen in place, staring up at him while tension curled tighter and tighter in my chest. "No," I whispered. Caleb's eyes flicked down to my mouth again. "No." His voice sounded rough now. Not teasing anymore. Something heavier. "You always this stubborn?" I asked softly. A faint smile pulled at one corner of his mouth. "Only when somebody keeps looking at me like they want me to kiss them." My heart nearly gave out. I tried to answer, but nothing came out. Caleb noticed that too. "Yeah," he murmured. "That's what I thought." Then his fingers tightened slightly against my waist. Not enough to hurt, just enough to pull me closer. The contact sent heat straight through me. "Still nervous?" he asked quietly. I laughed once under my breath. "You keep asking me that like it's funny." "It is funny." "Why?" "Because you're trying real hard to act calm." I rolled my eyes weakly. "Maybe because there's a stranger in my kitchen looking at me like that." Caleb leaned in just slightly closer. "And how am I looking at you?" I swallowed hard. "Like you want me." I didn't say it out loud, but judging by the expression on his face, he heard it anyway. The silence stretched. Neither of us moved. Then Caleb lifted one hand slowly toward my face. Every nerve in my body went tight instantly. His knuckles brushed lightly along my jaw before sliding down to my neck, rough fingertips warm against my skin. "Jesus," he muttered quietly. "You're shaking." "I blame you." That made him smile again. Smaller this time. Realer. For the first time since he walked in, Caleb didn't look smug or teasing. He looked affected, like he was trying just as hard to hold himself together now. which somehow made this even more intense. "You know what the problem is?" he asked softly. "What?" "You keep daring me." The way he said it made my stomach twist. I tried to steady my breathing. "Maybe you're easy to dare." Caleb let out a quiet laugh and lowered his head slightly until our foreheads almost touched. "You got no idea how bad of an idea this is." "Then why aren't you stopping?" That shut him up. For one long second, he just stared at me. Then his thumb brushed slowly along the side of my neck. "Because," he said quietly, "I don't think you want me to." I didn't. That was the problem. And judging by the tension in his jaw, Caleb was realizing he didn't want to stop either. Outside, somebody slammed a car door somewhere down the street, breaking the silence for half a second before the apartment fell quiet again. But neither of us moved apart. If anything, Caleb got closer. His hand slid from my neck down to my waist again, slower this time, like he was memorizing the shape of me already. My hoodie bunched slightly beneath his fingers. I could barely breathe normally anymore. "You always flirt with clients in tiny apartments?" I asked weakly. "Only cute ones." I laughed nervously. "That line probably works way too often." "Not a line." The immediate answer caught me off guard. Caleb looked serious now, completely serious, and somehow that hit harder than all the teasing before. "You think I'm cute?" I asked before I could stop myself. His eyes softened slightly. "Parker," he said quietly, "I noticed you the second you opened the door." That sent warmth flooding straight through my chest. Before I could respond, Caleb's phone suddenly buzzed loudly on the counter beside us. We both froze. The moment cracked instantly. Caleb stared at the screen with visible annoyance before dragging a hand down his face. "Shit." I blinked a few times, trying to recover my brain. "Everything okay?" "Another job." He looked genuinely irritated about it too. "Emergency pipe burst." For some reason, disappointment hit me embarrassingly hard. Caleb noticed immediately. His eyes narrowed slightly. "You're giving me that look again." "What look?" "The disappointed one." "I'm not disappointed." "You're a terrible liar." I opened my mouth to argue, but Caleb stepped forward one last time before I could, close enough that my pulse jumped all over again. Then, very casually, he reached into his back pocket and pulled out a folded receipt. He grabbed a pen from the counter beside the sink, scribbled something quickly, and handed it to me. I looked down. A phone number. My stomach flipped instantly. Caleb watched my reaction carefully before speaking. "In case your sink breaks again." The smirk in his voice made heat rush straight into my face. Then he leaned closer one final time and quietly added, "Or if you keep thinking about me touching you." I stared at the phone number long after Caleb left. The apartment felt weirdly empty without him in it, which was ridiculous. I'd known this man for less than an hour, and yet the second the door shut behind him, all I could think about was his hands on my waist, the way his voice dropped whenever he got close, the fact that he'd looked at me like he already knew exactly what he could do to me if I let him. I tossed the receipt onto the counter like it burned me, then immediately picked it back up again. "Jesus Christ," I muttered to myself. The rest of the day was useless. I tried working remotely from my couch, but every 5 minutes my attention drifted back toward the kitchen, toward the sink, toward the memory of Caleb standing there looking unfairly good in that tight gray work shirt. By evening, I'd convinced myself not to text him. By midnight, I was still holding my phone. Pathetic. I dropped onto my bed with a groan, staring at the ceiling while my brain replayed every second from earlier. Maybe I wasn't sorry. Only when they like it. "You got no idea what you're doing to me." No man should have been allowed to sound like that. I told myself Caleb probably flirted with everyone. Guys, girls, whoever. He was probably naturally confident and charming and completely aware of the effect he had on people. Meanwhile, I was over here spiraling because a hot plumber touched my waist twice. My phone buzzed suddenly in my hand. Unknown number. My stomach dropped immediately. I opened the message before I could stop myself. "Caleb, sink still working?" I actually laughed out loud, then immediately spent 3 full minutes overthinking how long to wait before replying. Finally, "Me? Barely. Think you traumatized the pipes." 3 dots appeared almost instantly. "Caleb, pretty sure I traumatized you instead." Heat rushed straight into my face. I stared at the screen, smiling like an idiot before typing back. "Me? You're very overconfident for someone covered in pipe water. This time the reply took longer. Then, Caleb, you were still staring though. I buried my face into my pillow immediately. God, there was no reason texting him should have felt this intense already. Still, I kept going. For the next hour, we texted about completely random things. Work, terrible landlords, movies, music. Somehow it all felt easy, natural in a way I wasn't expecting. Caleb was different over text. Still confident, still teasing, but softer too. At one point he sent, Caleb, you looked nervous when I got close earlier. I stared at the message for a long second before answering honestly. Me? Because you kept touching me. 3 dots appeared. Stopped. Appeared again. Finally, Caleb, couldn't help it. That one hit hard. I bit my lip staring at the screen while my chest tightened embarrassingly fast. Before I could think too hard about it, another message came through. Caleb, you want to know something? Me? Depends. Caleb, I almost kissed you in that kitchen. My heart slammed against my ribs. I reread the message 3 times just to make sure I wasn't imagining it. Then, me? What stopped you? The typing bubble appeared immediately this time. Disappeared. Came back again. Finally, Caleb, you looked like I'd ruin your life if I did. I laughed softly under my breath because the worst part was, maybe he was right. Not ruin exactly, but something about Caleb already felt dangerous. Like the kind of person who walked into your life unexpectedly and suddenly occupied every thought afterward. I rolled onto my side, staring down at the conversation. Then typed the dumbest possible thing I could have sent. Me? Maybe I would have let you. The reply came so fast it almost felt desperate. Caleb? Yeah. My pulse jumped instantly. I hesitated only half a second before answering. Me? Maybe. This time Caleb didn't reply right away. Instead, my phone suddenly started ringing. Unknown number. My stomach flipped violently. I stared at the screen for 1 terrified second before answering. Hello? For a moment all I heard was breathing. Then Caleb's voice. Lower than before. Closer somehow. Tell me something honestly, Parker. I swallowed hard. What? A pause. Then quietly. If I came back right now, would you still be nervous? My grip tightened around the phone. Just hearing Caleb's voice again made my entire body tense. If I came back right now, he repeated softly, would you still be nervous? I stared out into my dark apartment, pulse hammering. The honest answer? Yes, absolutely yes. But not because I wanted him gone. I think, I said slowly, you enjoy making me nervous way too much. A low laugh came through the speaker. You're avoiding the question. I rolled onto my back on the bed, staring at the ceiling. Maybe I'd still be nervous. Maybe. You keep getting really close to me and saying insane things, Caleb. And you keep liking it. Heat rushed into my face instantly because he sounded so sure. Worst part was, he was right. Silence stretched between us for a second. Then Caleb spoke again, quieter this time. I've been thinking about that kitchen all night. My stomach flipped hard. Yeah. A pause. About how you looked at me. I swallowed. How did I look at you? Like you wanted me to keep touching you. The memory hit immediately. His hand on my waist. His fingers against my neck. The way he kept moving closer until I couldn't think straight anymore. I closed my eyes briefly. Maybe I did. Caleb exhaled softly on the other end of the line. That sound alone nearly ruined me. You got no idea how hard it was leaving that apartment, he admitted quietly. Something warm twisted through my chest at that. Because until now Caleb had seemed completely in control of everything. Now he sounded affected too. You could have stayed, I whispered before I could stop myself. Silence. Heavy silence. Then, careful, Parker. There was that tone again. Low. Dangerous. You keep saying things like that and I'm gonna actually come back. My heart jumped so hard it hurt. I glanced automatically toward my apartment door even though I knew he wasn't there. You wouldn't. A soft chuckle came through the phone. You sure? I hated how much I wasn't sure. The conversation drifted after that, but somehow became even more intimate. Caleb asked about stupid little things, what music I liked, what I did for work, whether I always stayed up this late. And every answer somehow turned into flirting again. You always talk this much? He asked eventually. Only with hot plumbers. That word again. What word? Hot. I laughed quietly into my pillow. You are though. Caleb went silent for half a second too long. Then softly, you have no idea what hearing that from you does to me. My chest tightened instantly. Nobody should have been allowed to flirt this well over the phone. At some point I realized we'd been talking for almost 2 hours. Neither of us wanted to hang up. You working tomorrow? I asked quietly. MHM. What time? Early. Then why are you still awake? A pause. Then Caleb answered honestly. Because I can't stop thinking about you. That one completely knocked the air out of me. I sat up slowly in bed, heart pounding all over again. There was no teasing in his voice anymore. No smugness. Just honesty. And somehow that felt even more intense than everything before. You barely know me, I said softly. I know enough. My throat suddenly felt dry. Caleb lowered his voice slightly before asking. You thinking about me too? Could have lied. Instead I whispered. Since you left. Another silence. I heard him breathe out slowly. Jesus, Parker. The way he said my name sent heat rushing straight through me. Then came another pause. Longer this time, like he was debating something. Finally, come downstairs. I blinked immediately. What? I'm outside your building. My entire body went still. What? I never drove home. Caleb laughed quietly under his breath. Been sitting in my truck for 20 minutes trying not to text you something stupid. I stood up too fast from the bed, heart practically exploding. You're serious? Look out your window. I crossed the apartment in seconds and pulled the curtain aside. And there he was. Dark pickup truck parked across the street. Driver's side window down. Caleb leaning back in the seat with his phone against his ear, looking up toward my apartment with the smallest smirk when he saw me appear at the window. My stomach flipped so violently I had to grip the curtain. Still nervous? He asked softly through the phone. I should have stayed in my apartment. Any sane person would have. Instead, I stood frozen by the window staring down at Caleb in his truck while my heart absolutely lost its mind. Still nervous? He asked again through the phone. I laughed softly, mostly because I didn't know what else to do. You're actually insane. That didn't answer my question. Down below, Caleb leaned one arm casually out the open truck window while looking straight up at me. Waiting. God. Yes, I admitted quietly. I'm still nervous. His grin widened slightly. Good. Why is that good? Because if you weren't nervous, he said softly, I'd think you didn't want this. The way he said this made heat rush through me instantly. I glanced away from the window for half a second trying to steady myself. This is a terrible idea, I muttered. Probably. And you still came back. Yeah. Simple. Immediate. Like there hadn't even been a question. My stomach flipped again. Caleb tilted his head slightly while watching me through the window. You gonna make me sit out here all night? You're the one who decided to camp outside my building. A quiet laugh came through the phone. Then his expression softened slightly. Come downstairs, Parker. The way he said my name made my chest tighten. I should have said no. Instead, 10 minutes later, I was standing outside my building in a hoodie and sweats trying to act calmer than I felt. The second Caleb saw me walking toward the truck, his eyes slowly moved over me in a way that nearly stopped my heart. You came, he said quietly when I reached the driver's side window. You sounded persistent. Was trying real hard not to be. I crossed my arms against the cool night air. So what exactly was the plan here? Caleb leaned back in his seat slightly, still looking at me like he couldn't decide whether to smirk or kiss me. Haven't figured that out yet. That's reassuring. You could get in. My pulse jumped immediately. Caleb noticed. Of course he did. You always react like that around me? He asked softly. I rolled my eyes, but it had zero effect because he looked way too good sitting there under the dim streetlights. Black t-shirt now instead of the work uniform, tattoos visible down both forearms, one hand loose on the steering wheel. You're enjoying this way too much. Maybe. God, that word again. I glanced around the quiet street nervously before opening the passenger door and climbing into the truck. Instant mistake. The space inside was warm and smelled exactly like him. Soap, cedar, something faintly masculine underneath it that immediately made my brain short-circuit again. Caleb watched me settle into the seat before speaking. There's the nervous look. I hate you. No, you don't. Unfortunately true. The truck fell quiet for a second. Close quarters suddenly made everything feel more intense again. Caleb looked even bigger inside the cab somehow, one arm resting behind my seat while he turned slightly toward me. You look good, he said suddenly. My stomach flipped hard. It's literally midnight and I'm wearing sweatpants. MHM. His eyes moved slowly over me again. Still look good. I looked down immediately because holding eye contact felt impossible now. Caleb smiled softly to himself. What? I muttered. You get shy every time I compliment you. No, I don't. You literally stopped looking at me. Heat rushed into my face. That proves nothing. Caleb laughed quietly, then reached over slowly toward me. Every muscle in my body tightened instantly. His fingers brushed lightly against the sleeve of my hoodie first. Testing. Waiting. When I didn't pull away, his hand slid gently to my wrist. Warm. Rough. Careful this time. The contrast nearly killed me. You know, Caleb said quietly, thumb brushing once against my pulse point. I usually have more self-control than this. I looked up at him carefully. What changed? His eyes held mine for a long second. You opened the door. The honesty in his voice hit harder than any flirting had. Before I could respond, Caleb's hand moved slowly from my wrist up my arm until his fingers settled lightly against the side of my neck again, exactly where they'd been in my kitchen earlier. My breathing immediately went uneven. There it is, he murmured softly. What? That look. I swallowed hard. What look? Like you want me to do something about this already. The air inside the truck suddenly felt way too warm. Caleb leaned closer slowly, giving me plenty of time to stop him. I didn't. His forehead nearly touched mine as his hand stayed steady against my neck, thumb brushing lightly beneath my jaw. So tell me to stop, he whispered. Couldn't. And judging by the way Caleb's eyes darkened when I stayed silent, he knew it. Caleb was so close that I could feel every breath he took. The inside of the truck had gone completely quiet except for the faint sound of traffic somewhere far down the street. His hand stayed warm against my neck, fingers resting just beneath my jaw while he waited. So tell me to stop, he whispered again. I should have. Instead, I just stared at him. And that was apparently all the answer Caleb needed. His eyes dropped to my mouth one more time before he finally closed the distance. The kiss hit me like a shock. Warm. Slow at first. Careful in a way I wasn't expecting from someone who spent the entire day teasing me nonstop. My brain completely emptied the second his lips touched mine. I made the smallest sound against his mouth without meaning to, and Caleb reacted instantly. His hand tightened gently at my neck while he kissed me deeper, slower, like he'd been thinking about this for hours too, which apparently he had. Jesus, he muttered softly against my lips. Been wanting to do that since your kitchen. My pulse was absolutely gone. I kissed him back before I could overthink it, fingers gripping the front of his shirt automatically. Caleb let out a quiet breath that almost sounded surprised before one of his hands slid to my waist, pulling me closer across the center console. The angle was awkward. Didn't matter. Nothing mattered except Caleb kissing me like he'd finally stopped holding himself back. The tension from earlier hadn't disappeared. If anything, it got worse, because now I knew exactly what his mouth felt like, exactly how his hands felt holding me, exactly how quickly he could make me stop thinking straight. When we finally pulled apart, I was breathing embarrassingly hard. Caleb looked wrecked too, hair messy from my hand somehow ending up in it, chest rising slower than mine but definitely uneven. He stared at me for a second before laughing quietly under his breath. There's no way I'm driving home now. I laughed breathlessly. Why? Because I can barely think. That made warmth spread through my chest instantly. Caleb leaned back slightly in his seat but kept one hand resting firmly on my thigh now like he didn't even realize he was doing it. Or maybe he realized perfectly. You kiss everybody like that? I asked quietly. His thumb brushed once against my leg. No. The immediate answer made my stomach flip. Outside, cold air fogged faintly against the truck windows, while silence settled comfortably between us for the first time all night. Not awkward, just heavy, charged. Caleb looked over at me again after a minute. You got any idea how hard it was not touching you earlier? Heat rushed into my face immediately. You touched me plenty. Wanted to do worse. My entire brain short-circuited. Caleb noticed instantly and smirked slightly. That look again. You say really insane things casually. I'm being honest. That somehow made it worse. I leaned back into the seat trying to steady my breathing, while Caleb watched me with a softness that hadn't been there earlier. You always flirt this aggressively? I asked. Nah. His eyes moved slowly over my face again. Usually I don't lose my mind over somebody after 30 minutes. That hit harder than it should have. I looked down briefly, trying not to smile too obviously. Caleb reached over immediately, fingers brushing beneath my chin gently until I looked back at him. There you go again. What? Getting shy? I'm literally not. You literally are. I rolled my eyes weakly, but Caleb just laughed softly before leaning in to kiss me again. This time slower. More dangerous somehow. His hand slid higher along my thigh while my fingers curled into his shirt automatically. Every tiny movement felt amplified inside the cramped truck cab. Then Caleb suddenly stopped. Not fully. Just enough to rest his forehead against mine while breathing unevenly. Parker, he muttered quietly. The way he said my name nearly ruined me again. What? You keep making those sounds and I'm gonna forget how to behave. I buried my face briefly against his shoulder, laughing nervously from pure overwhelm. Caleb wrapped one arm around my waist immediately. Cute, he murmured. I hate when you call me cute. No, you don't. Still unfortunately true. A few seconds passed before Caleb tilted his head slightly toward me again. You hungry? I blinked. What? He smiled lazily. We've been flirting for like 6 hours. Figured I should at least feed you. The sudden normalness of the question made me laugh harder. You're unbelievable. You getting in trouble with a plumber this late at night probably means you should eat something. I shook my head smiling while Caleb watched me carefully. And then I realized something. For the first time all day, I wasn't nervous anymore. At least not in the same way. Now it felt different. Warmer. Like somehow, somewhere between the kitchen and this truck, Caleb had stopped feeling like a stranger. By the time Caleb parked outside the 24-hour diner a few blocks away, it felt weirdly natural being with him, which honestly should have terrified me. 12 hours ago, he was just some ridiculously attractive plumber showing up to fix my sink. Now I was sitting in his truck at 1 a.m. trying not to smile every time he looked at me. This place okay? He asked, turning off the engine. I glanced at the glowing neon sign outside. You always take guys to romantic diners after emotionally destroying them? Caleb laughed quietly, leaning back in his seat. Emotionally destroying you? You know exactly what you did. Emicham. His eyes flicked toward my mouth again. And you liked it. Heat rushed into my face immediately. God, he was impossible. Inside, the diner was mostly empty except for one tired waitress refilling coffee and a couple arguing quietly in the corner. Caleb slid into the booth across from me, long legs stretching beneath the table while he watched me with that same unreadable expression he'd had since my apartment. Like he still couldn't fully believe this was happening either. You keep staring, I muttered, grabbing a menu mostly to hide behind it. You're cute when you're embarrassed. There you go again, he smirked. You blush really easy, Parker. I kicked him lightly under the table. Caleb just grinned wider. The weird part was how easy everything felt now. We kept talking nonstop while eating fries and terrible diner burgers at almost 2 a.m. like we'd known each other longer than a single day. Caleb told me he'd been doing plumbing since he was 20, that he hated paperwork, loved old trucks, and secretly listened to awful pop music while driving between jobs. You listen to pop? I asked dramatically. Relax. He pointed a fry at me. Only when I'm sleep-deprived. That's somehow worse. You kissed me twice tonight. Don't judge my music taste. I nearly choked laughing. The waitress gave us an amused look from across the room. And for a second something hit me unexpectedly hard. I couldn't remember the last time I'd felt this comfortable with someone this quickly. Like my body had skipped past awkwardness entirely the second Caleb touched me. At some point Caleb reached across the table absent-mindedly and started tracing his thumb lightly over my wrist while I talked. No hesitation. No teasing this time. Just touching me because he wanted to. and somehow that affected me even more. You got quiet, he said softly. I looked down at his hand against mine. Just thinking. Dangerous. I smiled weakly. About how weird today was. Caleb nodded slightly like he understood exactly what I meant. Then, after a second, he admitted quietly, I almost didn't knock on your door earlier. I blinked. What? His thumb brushed slowly against my skin. When you opened it, he laughed softly to himself. You looked at me like I was already gonna be trouble. You were. Yeah. The honesty in his voice made my chest tighten again. I leaned back slightly in the booth. So what now? Caleb's eyes lifted to mine immediately. What do you mean? I mean, I gestured vaguely between us. This. The flirting slowed for the first time all night. Not awkwardly. Just real. Caleb studied me carefully for a second before answering. I don't know, he admitted. But I know I don't want tonight to be the only time I see you. That hit embarrassingly hard. I looked down for a second trying to hide how much I liked hearing that. Caleb noticed anyway. Hey! His voice softened slightly. When I looked back up, he was already watching me. I'm serious. The warmth in my chest spread instantly, and suddenly all the teasing from earlier made sense. Caleb flirted because it was easier than saying what he actually felt. But right now he looked sincere, careful even, like this mattered more than he expected. Good, I admitted quietly, because I don't want that either. Something in his expression shifted immediately after I said it. Smaller smile, softer eyes. Then Caleb squeezed my hand once beneath the table. Outside, dawn was still hours away. The diner lights buzzed softly overhead while tired music played somewhere near the kitchen. And sitting there across from him, I realized something terrifying. This wasn't just attraction anymore. Somewhere between the leaking sink, the kitchen tension, and Caleb showing up outside my building in the middle of the night, something real had started. A week later, Caleb was still finding excuses to come over. Not that I was complaining. First, it was checking the sink pressure. Then it was making sure the pipes held. Then somehow he showed up claiming my bathroom faucet sounded suspicious, even though it worked perfectly fine. You know I'm starting to think you're lying just to see me? I said one evening while Caleb stood in my kitchen drinking my coffee like he lived there. He looked completely unbothered. Maybe your apartment's just falling apart. Convenient. MHM. I rolled my eyes, but I was smiling. That had become a problem around Caleb. Everything with him felt strangely easy now. He still teased me constantly, still looked at me in ways that made my brain stop functioning. But underneath all of it, there was something softer growing between us. Something real. And honestly, that scared me a little, because people didn't usually walk into my life this fast. Especially not people like Caleb. That night, he stayed long after sunset. We ended up on my couch watching some terrible action movie neither of us cared about while my legs rested across his lap. At some point, Caleb started absent-mindedly rubbing his thumb against my ankle while focusing on the TV. Tiny gesture. Completely ruined me. You do that on purpose, I muttered. Do what? The touching thing. Caleb glanced down at me with the smallest smirk. You complaining? No. Thought so. God. I buried my face into the couch cushion while he laughed quietly. A few minutes later, though, the teasing faded. Caleb's hand slowed against my leg before eventually stilling completely. You okay? I asked, noticing the shift immediately. He hesitated, which almost never happened. Then he leaned his head back against the couch and exhaled slowly. Can I tell you something? The sudden seriousness in his voice made me sit up slightly. Yeah. Caleb looked down at his hands for a second before speaking. I almost didn't text you that first night. I blinked. Why? Because I knew if I kept talking to you. He laughed softly without humor. I was gonna get attached. That hit me right in the chest. Caleb wasn't looking at me now. His jaw looked tense, shoulders tighter than usual. And suddenly I realized something important. For all his confidence, Caleb had been nervous too. Maybe not in the same obvious way I was. But enough. You regret it? I asked quietly. His eyes snapped to mine immediately. No. The answer came so fast it almost startled me. Caleb shifted closer on the couch then, one arm resting along the back behind me while he looked at me carefully. I just wasn't expecting this. This? You. The room suddenly felt very warm again. I tried to joke my way out of it. Wow, that was disgustingly smooth. I'm serious, Parker. And there it was again. That honesty. It always hit harder than the flirting ever did. Caleb reached up slowly and brushed his fingers along my jaw, softer than someone with rough hands should have been capable of. You got under my skin way too fast. My chest tightened painfully. I looked down for a second because holding eye contact suddenly felt impossible again. Caleb smiled faintly. There's the shy thing. Shut up. He laughed quietly before tilting my chin back toward him. No, seriously. His voice lowered slightly. You have any idea what you've done to me? I swallowed hard. Probably the same thing you did to me. That shut him up for a second. Then Caleb leaned forward and kissed me again. Slow. Warm. Nothing like the desperate tension from the truck that first night. This felt different. Closer. His hand settled against my waist automatically while mine slid into his hair. And suddenly the entire apartment felt quiet except for us breathing. When we finally pulled apart, Caleb rested his forehead lightly against mine. You know what's crazy? He murmured. What? All this because your sink broke. I laughed softly against his mouth. Honestly? I whispered. Best thing my landlord ever ignored. Caleb smiled at that. A real smile this time. Not teasing. Just happy. Then he kissed me one more time, slow enough to make my chest ache, while his hands stayed warm against my side exactly where he touched me the very first day. Only now, he still wasn't apologizing.